The bottle was already open when Kezia noticed it. She was 8 years old, the daughter of one of the catering staff, and she had no business being in the east wing of the Alderton Hall reception room at all. But she had wandered in from the kitchen corridor looking for her mother, and she had stopped dead at the edge of the long mahogany bar, where a single bottle of single malt scotch sat uncorked, angled slightly away from the row of sealed bottles beside it. And there was a man crouched behind the bar, not the regular bartender, his hands moving quickly over something she couldn't quite see. He didn't notice her. She backed away without a word. Lawrence Alderton had spent 53 years learning to read rooms. He'd started as a junior clerk at a Bay Street firm in Toronto at 22, made partner by 34, and by 60 he had argued before the Supreme Court of Canada 4 times and won 3 of them. He was not a man who missed details. He noticed when opposing counsel adjusted their tie before lying. He noticed when a witness's breathing changed. He noticed everything. He did not notice Kezia. This was the night of his retirement dinner. The partners of Alderton, Marsh and Fenn, had booked the private reception hall of the Fairmont Royal York. A full floor, 60 guests, a jazz quartet, a chef flown in from Montreal. The firm had spent what Lawrence privately considered an obscene amount of money on this evening, and he had allowed it because his wife, Eleanor, had asked him to allow it, and because after 40 years of choosing the firm over dinners and school plays and Saturday mornings, he owed her at least the spectacle of a proper goodbye. He stood near the tall windows that looked out over Front Street and accepted handshakes and embraced people he genuinely liked and smiled at people he didn't, and he drank his first glass of scotch slowly and thought about Monday morning, when he would wake up and have nowhere to be. He wasn't sure yet whether that prospect frightened him or not. He suspected it did. His son-in-law, Brett Saunders, appeared at his elbow with a second glass already poured. "From the private stock," Brett said. Colleagues chipped in. 25-year Glenfarclas. Thought we'd toast properly later. Lawrence accepted the glass with genuine warmth. Brett was a decent man. Not brilliant, not someone Lawrence would have recruited, but decent in all the ways that mattered, and he made Lawrence's daughter Abigail laugh, which counted for a great deal. "Thank you," Lawrence said. "I mean it." Brett squeezed his shoulder and disappeared back into the crowd. Lawrence set the glass on the windowsill beside him. He wasn't ready for it yet. He was in the middle of a story, something about the Pemberton case, 1998, and he wanted to finish it properly before the toast. Old habit. He never started something he couldn't finish. He kept talking. The glass sat. Kezia Oduya found her mother in the kitchen corridor behind the service entrance, and she tugged on her sleeve 3 times before her mother turned. "Mama, not now, Kezia." Her mother, Adana Oduya, was carrying a tray of appetizers and moving with the particular efficiency of someone who had 15 other things on her mind. She was a contract catering server, good at her job, and she needed tonight to go smoothly. "Stay in the back room, I told you." "Mama, I saw a man. There are 60 men in there. Come." He was behind the bar, not the bartender. He was touching one of the bottles. Adana stopped. She looked at her daughter, really looked at her the way she rarely had time to do on a work night. Kezia's face was serious in the way children's faces become serious when they know something is wrong but don't have the vocabulary to explain exactly what. She wasn't dramatizing. She wasn't looking for attention. "Which bottle?" Adana said quietly. "The one that was already open, with no lid. He put something in it, and then he put it back on the bar." Adana set the tray down on the nearest surface. Her hands were steady, but her mind was already running fast. "Show me." The problem was that Adana Oduya was a contract server. She had no authority in this room. She had no relationship with Lawrence Alderton or anyone at the firm. She was staff, and the unspoken hierarchy of these events was something she understood better than anyone, because she had been navigating it for 11 years. She found the head of catering, a man named Jeffrey Trask, and she pulled him aside and told him what Kezia had seen. She kept her voice low and her words clear. Jeffrey listened. He looked at Kezia. He looked at the bar across the room. "I can't accuse a guest of," he began. "I'm not asking you to accuse anyone," Adana said. "I'm asking you to delay the scotch. That's the toast bottle, the one the partners brought. If I pull it now, then pull it quietly. Tell them the cork is faulty. Tell them anything." Jeffrey's jaw tightened. He glanced toward the bar again. The bartender, the real one, a young man named Felix who had been working the Fairmont's events for 3 years, was already pouring from another bottle, the sealed ones from the hotel's own supply. The open bottle sat at the far end of the bar, untouched. "I'll look into it." Adana watched his face. She knew that expression. She had seen it on principals when she'd reported that her son was being bullied. She'd seen it on building managers when she'd reported a gas smell in the stairwell. It was the expression of a person who was calculating the cost of acting versus the cost of not acting, and quietly concluding that the first one was higher. She was not going to let him calculate his way out of this. My daughter is 8 years old, Adana said. She has no reason to make this up. If something happens to that man tonight and it comes out that you knew, that I told you and you told me you would look into it, then this is not a problem I carry alone. Jeffrey's expression shifted. The calculation changed. All right, he said. I'll pull the bottle. He did pull it. He did it quietly, replacing it behind the bar under the guise of restocking, and Felix, who had been briefed in a rapid 30-second conversation, moved efficiently without asking questions. The open bottle was taken to the back, but the toast was still coming, in 12 minutes by Jeffrey's estimate, and the man Kezia had seen crouching behind the bar, the one with quick hands, was still somewhere in this room. Adana didn't know who he was. She only knew what her daughter had described. Medium height, dark jacket, gray at the temples, moving fast like he knew he had limited time. She scanned the room. There were 9 men in this room who matched that description in some combination. She needed another way. Kezia had been told to stay near the kitchen corridor, and she had, mostly. She stood at the edge of the doorway, where the carpet changed from the reception hall's deep burgundy to the service corridor's plain gray. And she watched the room with the particular patience of a child who has been asked to wait somewhere and has decided that the doorway is technically not the place they were told to leave. She saw him again within 4 minutes. He was standing near the far end of the room, close to the windows, talking to 2 other men. He had a drink in his hand. Not scotch, something clear, and he was nodding along to something one of the other men was saying. He looked comfortable. He looked like he belonged, but he kept glancing toward the bar. Kezia watched the glance. She had a child's particular talent for tracking where someone's eyes actually go versus where they're pretending to look, the kind of skill that develops when you've spent years in rooms full of adults who think children aren't watching. She memorized his face. She was good at memorizing faces. She memorized the small scar along his jawline, the way his left hand held his glass slightly too high, the lapel pin on his jacket, a small silver circle with something in the center she couldn't quite read from here. Then she walked across the reception room floor. 60 people and no one stopped an 8-year-old crossing a carpet. Adults were remarkable in their ability to not see what was right in front of them when it was child-sized. She stopped 3 feet from the man and looked up at him. He noticed her then. Most people noticed when you stopped directly in front of them. Hi, she said. He blinked. Hello, not unfriendly, but distracted. His eyes moved to her, then back to the bar, then back to her. Are you supposed to be in here? One of the other men asked, not unkindly. My mum works the catering, Kezia said. She kept her eyes on the man with the scar. I saw you behind the bar before. The room around them didn't stop. The jazz quartet was playing something low and warm. 60 people were talking, laughing, moving. No one was paying attention to one small girl having a conversation near the windows, but the man went very still. I think you have me confused with someone else, he said. His voice was even, practiced even. No, Kezia said. You had something in your hand. You put it in the bottle. One of the other men frowned. What is she talking about? The man with the scar looked at Kezia for a long moment. His face was controlled, but his jaw had done something small and tight that she noticed. Someone should find this child's mother, he said, and took a step back. Adana was already moving. She had watched her daughter cross the room, heart in her throat, wanting to call her back, knowing she couldn't make a scene, and she had watched the conversation from across the floor, reading her daughter's posture and the man's body language with the clarity of someone who has had to read rooms from a disadvantage for most of her life. She was at Kezia's side in 40 seconds. Kezia. She put a hand on her daughter's shoulder, firm, not panicked. She looked at the man with the scar. I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm with the catering team. My daughter. Your daughter is making accusations, the man said. His voice had found a new register now, something harder, slightly indignant. I think she needs to be taken out of the room. What kind of accusations? Said a voice from behind Adana. She turned. Lawrence Alderton had apparently finished his story. He was a tall man, still straight-backed at 60, with the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades in courtrooms learning to take up exactly as much space as needed and not 1 inch more. His eyes moved from Adana to Kezia to the man with the scar, and something in his face changed. Not alarm, exactly, but attention. The full kind. This is your evening, Lawrence, the man said with a short laugh. Don't let a child's imagination interrupt it. I find children's imaginations are generally more reliable than adults give them credit for, Lawrence said mildly. He looked at Kezia. What's your name? Kezia. Kezia, what did you see? She told him. Clearly in sequence, without drama, the bottle with no cap, the man crouching, the hand going in and then coming back empty, the bottle going back to the bar. Lawrence listened without erupting. He had spent 40 years listening to witnesses. He knew the difference between a rehearsed account and a direct one. He knew the difference between a child seeking attention and a child delivering information. This was the second kind. When she finished, he turned to the man with the scar. "Explain that," he said. "Not a request, not aggressive. Just the particular flatness of a man who has asked questions under oath and knows exactly what evasion looks like when it arrives." The man's name was Stuart Wycliffe. He was a former associate at Alderton, Marsh and Fenn, dismissed 18 months ago in circumstances that had been handled quietly, the way these things usually were. He had been invited tonight by another guest, had arrived with a couple whose names were on the list, and no one had checked closely enough. He did not answer Lawrence's question. Instead, he said, "I'm not going to stand here and be interrogated by a child and a catering server." "Then you can stand here and be interrogated by me," Lawrence said. Jeffrey Trask had already called hotel security, a decision that had taken him 9 minutes longer than it should have, and that he would regret for the rest of his career, but that he had eventually made. 2 security staff entered the room that good hotel security learns early. The bottle was retrieved from the back. It was tested. The results came back within the hour, after the guests had been asked gently but firmly to move to a secondary room while the situation was resolved. The jazz quartet had continued playing for an additional 12 minutes before someone told them to stop, which was, in retrospect, the most surreal detail of the evening. There was something in the scotch, a compound, something colorless, tasteless, and in the quantity present, enough to cause serious cardiac complications in a man of Lawrence's age and medical history. How Wycliffe had obtained it was a question for the investigation that followed. Why was less of a question. 18 months of a ruined career has a logic of its own. Lawrence sat in the hotel manager's office and gave a statement to the police officers who arrived within 20 minutes of the call. He sat straight in his chair. His voice was level. His hands, resting on the arms of the chair, were still. When the officers left the room briefly, Eleanor appeared in the doorway. She had been in the secondary room with the rest of the guests, and she had been told enough to understand what had almost happened without being told everything. She looked at her husband for a long moment. "Lawrence," she said. "I'm all right," he said. "I know." She crossed the room and sat beside him. She took his hand, not urgently, just quietly, the way you take someone's hand when you've been beside them long enough to know when words aren't the right tool. "I know you are." He held her hand and looked at the middle distance and said nothing for a while. Adana found Kezia in the corridor outside the manager's office, sitting on a chair that was slightly too tall for her, legs swinging. Someone had brought her a glass of orange juice, which she was drinking with the careful attention of a child making it last. Adana sat beside her. She didn't say anything immediately. "Did I do the right thing?" Kezia asked. "Yes," Adana said. "He said it was confusing him with someone else. He was wrong." Kezia considered this. She drank some of her orange juice. He had a pin on his jacket, a silver one, a circle with a bird inside. Adana hadn't seen that detail in any of her daughter's descriptions before now. She stored it away, mentioned it to the officer when he came back through. It turned out to be useful. Lawrence asked to speak with them before they left the hotel that night. He stood in the corridor, not behind a desk, not in a chair, just standing, because he'd been sitting for an hour and he needed to be on his feet. And he looked at Adana, and then at Kezia, and he said, directly and without preamble, that he understood what they had done and what it had cost them to do it. "I know it would have been easier," he said to Adana, "to tell your daughter she was mistaken and leave it alone." "It would have," Adana said. "Thank you for not doing that." She nodded once. He looked at Kezia. "You crossed a room full of strangers to tell a man something he didn't want to hear, on the chance that it might matter. That takes something." Kezia looked at him. "My mum says if you see something wrong, you say so, even if people don't listen, because sometimes they do." Lawrence was quiet for a moment. "Your mother is correct," he said. Stuart Wycliffe was charged and held that night. The investigation expanded in the weeks that followed and eventually included the question of who, if anyone, had helped him obtain access to the event, a question that produced an uncomfortable conversation with the couple who had brought him. That conversation and its consequences belonged to the firm's internal affairs team and moved at the pace these things always move, which is to say slowly and painfully and with a great deal of careful language. Lawrence Alderton retired on schedule. He woke on the Monday after the dinner and had nowhere to be. And it did frighten him, a little, and then it frightened him less, and then it frightened him less. And then Eleanor handed him a cup of coffee and the morning paper and sat across the kitchen table from him. He did not stop thinking he's learned to do. He did not stop thinking about that evening. He thought about it on Tuesday morning when he read the paper. He thought about it the following weekend, when he was looking for something in the back of his closet and found his old trial notebooks, rubber-banded and stacked, decades of other people's problems recorded in his handwriting. He thought about the glass of scotch sitting on the windowsill. He thought about Brett's face when he'd handed it to him, the genuine warmth in his son-in-law's eyes, and the fact that Wycliffe had banked on that warmth, had known that Lawrence would accept a glass from someone he trusted without looking at it too carefully. He had been wrong about his own attention. He had noticed everything in courtrooms for 40 years, and he had been completely blind to what was happening 6 feet from where he stood, because it had been happening below his eye line. An 8-year-old girl had been paying attention for him. He wrote 2 letters in the weeks that followed. The first was to the Fairmont, regarding Jeffrey Trask's delayed response and the gap in security protocol that had allowed an uninvited guest access to a private event. The letter was specific, professional, and not unkind, because Lawrence understood the difference between failure of courage and failure of character, even if he had little patience for the former. The second letter was to Adana Oduya, care of the catering company she worked for. He thanked her plainly, without flourish, and enclosed something else, a letter of reference that he spent 2 days writing, which was longer than he had spent on any document in the last year of his career, and which was addressed to the director of catering operations at the Four Seasons Toronto, where he knew the hiring manager personally, and where the work was steadier, the schedule more predictable, and the pay considerably better. He also established a small education bursary in his name at a Toronto elementary school. Not the school Kezia attended, because he didn't want to draw attention to her or complicate her life with his gratitude. Just a school, in the neighborhood, for children who needed it. He told Eleanor about the bursary over breakfast on a Thursday morning, the way he told her most things, plainly, without drama, in between sips of coffee. She looked at him over her cup. "Good," she said. That was all. It was enough. Adana showed Kezia the reference letter 6 months later, when Kezia was old enough to understand what it was. She didn't explain all of it, not the politics of how these things worked, not the particular weight of having someone like Lawrence Alderton put his name to a document about you. But she read her the part that mattered. She acted without hesitation and without expectation of recognition. She did what she believed was right, and then she stood by it when it was questioned. I have known very few adults capable of that. I am grateful to have met a child who was. Kezia listened to the whole thing. Then she said, "Can I go outside now?" Adana laughed. Really laughed, the kind that comes up suddenly from somewhere you weren't expecting, and said yes, and watched her daughter run out the back door into the yard, and stood in the kitchen for a moment, holding the letter and feeling, in the quiet of a Thursday afternoon, something that was not quite relief and not quite pride, but lived somewhere between the two, and felt, for the first time in a long time, like solid ground.